Good afternoon and welcome to CIRA's virtual meetup. Today we'll be discussing equity, diversity, and inclusion, sometimes referred to as EDI, and how the tech sector is adapting. My name is Spencer Callahan. I'm the Senior Manager of Brand and Communications here at CIRA. Before I go on, please note that today's event is taking place in English only. I want to thank you all for joining us today. At CIRA, we work hard to build a trusted internet for Canadians. That commitment extends to our work environment for our staff. Equity, diversity, and inclusion are core to how CIRA operates, and we feel it's an important foundation for any organization to have. Employers play a pivotal role in creating a fair and more equitable workplace where people can thrive. The tech industry has long struggled to make progress on EDI efforts, whether in terms of workforce diversity or the makeup of boards or companies to which the capital flows. Diversity encompasses so much more than metrics. Developing a holistic perspective on this topic and dedicated resources to inclusion efforts can lead to increased fairness and more equitable arrangements in the technology sector. Before I introduce today's guest speaker, I'd like to pose a question to the group. Does your organization have an EDI strategy in place? Just wait for a few more votes to come in. Okay, looking at the results, it seems like 85% say they have an EDI strategy for their employees. That's actually a really good result. It's good to see that a lot of employers are taking this subject seriously and starting to put strategies in place. So speaking of which, today we'll be joined by Jamile Cruz, a leading EDI expert and speaker who was recently recognized by the Globe and Mail as a business changemaker. Jamile will share insight into the EDI challenges many tech organizations face and will speak to the role we all play in shaping a work environment that is based on respect for individuals and recognition for the powerful contributions diversity brings to an organization. Now let's get started. Thanks for joining us today, Jamile.
Thank you, Spencer. Thanks, CIRA, for having me.
Great. So before we get started, I want to remind our viewers that this is a discussion that's not just for me, it's for you as well. We want to hear your questions. So you can type questions in the question window to the right of the video player. You can type a question and click submit, and you can also upvote questions you wish to see asked. We'll address your questions a bit later in the program. So now that we've got the logistics out of the way, Jamile, let's just start off, talking a little bit about the industry as a whole. So it's no secret that the technology industry specifically, faces a wealth of challenges with EDI, as many others do. Women, for example, only account for about 25% of Canada's tech industry. And it's a number that's remained relatively stagnant over the past 10 years. So to start us off, what barriers exist in the technology sector that make EDI efforts difficult to overcome?
Okay, let's get started. Before we talk about barriers, I just want to recognize that yesterday in Canada, June 21st, was the National Indigenous People Day. And we usually, when we do workshops with corporations, we try to give as many tools or resources for people to do their own research, learn on their own time. And I think it's quite important for all of us Canadians to really do our learning exercise around Indigenous people and reconciliation. So one person that I always recommend is Bob Joseph. He does try to make it a little easier for people to spend the time learning. So he did write an article last year around the 10 things you can do around Kamloops Indian residential schools. So take your time, read a little bit. There's always space for us to evolve on our understanding and learn. So that's what I wanted to share. But let's go to your question around the barriers that exist in technology sector today. So one, I would say, which is for all groups and sectors, is culture, right? Culture, we understand as behavior at scale. So it is the ways people act, the behaviors that are shown, what people say when they are at work. And that consistency on the patterns of behaviors of organizations, it's what really defines their culture. It's not the values that they decided to write on their website. Culture is still a barrier for tech and other sectors because we don't necessarily behave aligned with the values that we talk about when we say integrity, courage, respect. One of the questions we like to do exercise with corporations, like when you say respect, who is being respected at work, right? What are the lines of that respect at work that essentially might discriminate or push people out of that workplace? A second one is representation, right? You mentioned the numbers around women. It's hard to see yourself or get that feeling of belonging when you're not represented at a workplace. And we know that representation for specific groups might be higher or lower within the tech sector in Canada. But the reality is that leadership groups are still very homogeneous and not diverse, and that creates limitations for people when they are looking into a corporation to walk in and think, okay, this is a corporation that I want to assign for, or that I'm going to be well treated or well respected, or that I'm going to have access to opportunities for growth.
I really like the definition you started off with of culture being behavior at scale, because I feel like that's a really important element as opposed to, you know, values or, you know, EDI policies that you may have, right? The idea that it's actually how humans or how all of us interact and behave that dictates how well we are able to incorporate EDI into our workplaces.
You know, I always tell people, like, it's an exercise that our organizations or our people who are listening here today participating with us can do. It's get a group of people from your workplace and try to write it down how you would describe the culture of your workplace, and then kind of compare that to the values that are described, because on the workshops that we run, usually those are quite different, right? There's the culture that is the description on the website or on the culture and ethics policy, but then there's the culture that we're living in on a daily basis, and that's the one that we need to treat.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I guess you're probably very familiar with the idea that many companies, not just in technology, but in a lot of industries, are more reactionary on EDI than proactive. Why do you think it's important for organizations to proactively create and implement EDI strategies?
Sure. We usually use a maturity curve when we're discussing with organizations, starting from inactive all the way to dynamic. And unfortunately, we're still on that maturity level where most organizations are sometimes, unfortunately, inactive. A lot of change in the last 2 years from inactive to reactive, but not a lot of people sitting on the proactive, active, or dynamic, right? We're still moving quite slow through that curve. Why is it important to be proactive or active? Like, we need to understand who is composing our workforce, right? We need to understand that people have experiences in and outside of the workplace, and that the world and the systems we live in, they're designed in a certain way. So I love quoting the book from Adam Grant on Atomic Habit, where the systems are not broken, right? The systems are designed to deliver the results that we see. So if we're unhappy or if we want to see different results, we need to be able to challenge and redesign systems. So when we talk about challenging and redesign systems, we really need to look at the strategies we have around the whole employee life cycle in a workplace. So from recruitment to retirement, and understand what are the processes that we're implementing that might be leaving people out, right? Usually when we engage with corporations, it's quite clear that they're trying to address EDI by putting a specific pillar and say, here's the program, here are the programs we're going to do, here are the things that we're going to treat, but they don't look at the overall corporation and the systems that we run daily. So if we were to think about like a tech consulting firm, or even like a law firm, to make it easier for everybody, you grow based on the clients that you're working in, right? So for you not to look into how clients are assigned to new lawyers, you're having a problem with the EDI of your organization right there, right? Because if that's the system that runs your overall organization, if you don't treat that system with the lenses of EDI, you might continue to propagate discrimination or challenges you have there. So for tech systems or tech organizations, the same occurs. Like you need to look into the core systems of your organization and apply the lenses to figure out like what are the things that we really need to change if we want to see different results.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I guess I'm just thinking about systems versus what you mentioned earlier about culture. I guess there could also be a situation where the system is designed properly, but the culture just is having people either not use it or avoid it or use sort of back channels to get around systems they don't like. Do you see that a lot in your work?
For sure. Like I come from a tech and consulting and engineering background, and I feel like it doesn't matter how many years we pass through. I'm in a conference here right now, and the conversations too around people process technology. So when we look at those, each one of them have their part to play, right? So we can talk about people and talk about unconscious bias and mindset change and culture. And for sure, we need that piece of evolving the knowledge foundation of people and challenge the mindset so we can create new forms of behaviors. But we also need the systems and the tools to accompany that and the strategies so people are essentially being influenced as well or stopped and checked throughout the system. So you have ways of using systems and tools and everything to essentially form the behaviors that you want to see on that workplace. One example that we use a lot with the industrial areas we work with, it's health and safety, right? So like if you look at 30 years ago, we didn't have the certifications, the level of commitment for metrics and checks on everything we do around health and safety in industrial settings. And now, even on the conference here, when the COO of this organization walked into the stage for the opening, we're like, something's wrong here. Like, let's start with a safety share. And we look around, the stage didn't have the marks for the borders, and it's quite a high stage. And we're like, okay, I put my hands up. I was like, I already felt out of stage in a conference before. I don't want this to happen on this specific scenario, but just the culture of having health and safety moments, of always checking if this place is safe for everybody who's participating. The step that we're asking for EDI and everything we're discussing here, it's the psychosocial safety. So are people safe here from a psychological perspective? Like, are they safe to work and share their opinions and create and innovate? So if you don't have the culture and that environment where the behaviors showcase that, then we have a challenge to address.
I want to pick up, you just talked about the idea of being safe, sort of intellectually or mentally. Why is that important in a workplace? Because I think some people might be curious about sort of why that actually is an important aspect to a healthy work environment.
For sure. I think we all show up to the workplace wanting to contribute, right? We developed our knowledge, we sign up for a role, we want to show up and be part of a team and be part of creating or producing or creating something that we believe in. So showing up for workplaces where you might not feel safe to say what you believe, or that your contribution is not being recognized or regarded at the same level as your coworkers, that essentially with time diminish your participation and you just don't feel that sense of belonging that we talk so much, where you understand that the same opportunities are available to you just like for everybody else. So the importance of a safe workplace where you can put your hand up to speak up and say, this is what I want to contribute with, or this is my idea, and things are taken into consideration. It's important for the opportunities that are created. It's important for people to feel like they can grow and they can be part of your organization. And unfortunately, a lot of workplaces today, specifically when you look in the intersectional ways we participate. So in my example, being a woman, immigrant to Canada, a Black woman, sometimes my voice might not be as loudly heard as someone else. So the idea of creating a space where everybody can participate and that the opportunities are going to be available, it's quite important for the growth. And when we're talking about tech and the innovation that we need, if I'm showing up with all my knowledge, my engineering degree, and everything that I can contribute, and I feel like I'm being silenced every day, I'm going to find another route, right? For me, that route is entrepreneurship, but we can find many other routes, and sometimes it might not be as positive as you creating your own business. It might be people shutting down and trying to find something else. Like I was looking at numbers this morning, and immigrants to Canada with engineering degrees are like overly underemployed, right? So
Yeah.
having to figure out how we can engage and create spaces where people have opportunities is quite important, because we would see the diversity we talk about so much.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, because in the technology sector, I would think feeling safe to share any and all ideas you may have would be a huge benefit to an organization that was looking to innovate, or that was looking for new ideas. I mean, there's the old saying, there's no such thing as a dumb question, but I think that the idea that it's not necessarily the best saying, but I think the idea there is that everyone should feel safe to bring their ideas to the table. And if you don't feel safe based on your background or how you've been treated, or the fact that you don't feel valued, there's potentially a lot of really great ideas and perspectives being left unsaid.
100%. And I think we can see that. Like, I think I mentioned to you when we connected the first time, like how excited I was to potentially go to Collision, because I feel like out of the tech conference that I've participated, they made a real effort to really make they stage as diverse as it was possible. So like the first time I participated, I felt like I walked away with so many different voices in my head, and it didn't feel like it was a one way of approaching technology. It was like multiple visions, multiple ways. And I feel like that just encouraged me to look at different opportunities. And I feel like the conversations through the networking and the information that was shared was just to a different level than any place I've been before. So when I think about bringing that same experience to a workplace where everybody's actually able to contribute and multiple voices are heard at the same level, I can only imagine what we would be able to create in terms of solutions and new ideas, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm curious if you have any advice for organizations and how they can address their culture in a way that would allow them to approach it more intentionally to create that environment of diversity and inclusion and belonging. Like, what are the things that, other than sort of policies, I guess, like what things can organizations put in place to create a more inclusive culture?
And one of the things that we always share and challenge people in organizations on, it's how a strategy around equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's not that different than creating a strategy or business strategy in other areas of the organization. So compared to my past life, when I used to do digitization strategies, these steps are the same steps required, because at the end, you have a change management program, right? We're talking about transitioning a culture or transitioning policies and systems from A to B. So to do that, you need the same level of engagement that you would do with any other strategy, and probably a bit more, because we're then challenging mindsets and ways of operating. If we can bring it up, I shared a chart that kind of helps me walk people through the steps that we share with organizations. I'd love to share with this group as well.
Yeah, sure.
I think this works.
Let's try it.
Okay, maybe I'll start talking through, and if it comes up, great.
There we go. There we go.
So to your question, like on intentionally shaping organizational culture, right? We share this because we feel like this helps people set their minds into really doing the things that are required for people to engage and push towards results. So step number one being really defining, like, why are we doing this, right? What is the vision here? What is the storyline that's going to help us share this idea or this new vision with the rest of our organization? So we talk about a lot on the business case for EDI. The importance here is for your business case to be solid for your organization, right? So if I'm a tech company and I'm operating in Ottawa, Canada, and the reasons why we're developing this new software, it's because we want to help this specific audience. The same exercise that you do on definition of persona and define your use case, you need to go through that process to say, okay, if we're going to invest on EDI, here are the reasons why. When we discuss, like, we know we all have the social consciousness of the world we live in, but it's quite important for us to define that quite clearly for the organization. And then from there, do the declaration of values based on what needs to sustain or what needs to be the foundation for what you're trying to create or the new things that we want to discuss. So going beyond creating or defining or redefining or reaffirming your values is to define behaviors, right? We all have our concept of integrity. When we ask that in workshops, people say it's doing the right thing even when people are not seeing. But then for your organization, what does integrity mean? Like on the moments that matter, what are the behaviors you expect from all the way from your leadership to the workers in every single office, right? So define the behaviors. This is good, this is not good behavior, because what that allows, like the companies that I see that are more advanced on EDI implementation, is that they have ways of applying the consequence, right? So if you define clearly the values and then the behaviors, you're able to say, look, this is not okay in our organization, or within this 4 doors here of our site or our operations or our office, we do expect people to behave in a certain way when it comes to this, and this is what we qualify as discrimination and all of that. So then defining the behaviors, the next thing is activate your leadership, right? Have your leadership being modeling those things that you said you're going to do, or showcasing your values the best way. So getting leaders, like this is new for some people. It's not new for society, but we all need to like upgrade our skills and our understanding on how we act, how we talk. So giving your leadership team those skills up front so they can start modeling those behaviors for the rest of your workforce, and then kind of trickling down or cascading through. It's quite important. And then create an accountability model, right? We all have performance reviews in our organization. I always say, like, if you're for a plant and operation, if the only thing that you're measuring is production rate, you're setting the standard to what's important for you, right? And the culture will follow that. So if all you care is that, so if all you care is sales, your culture will be designed on what it takes to deliver on the sale target. So if that's important to you, it needs to be also important to you, the behaviors. So performance around behaviors before performance metrics around culture needs to be in place too. And then the last thing is measure progress. So if you have ways, dashboards, metrics, data analytics, where you're saying, this is what we're implementing today. So from a strategy to actions to programs, this is what we propose to do. This is how we're going to measure success. That success criteria needs to be clear, and you need to measure to adjust, right? Some things are not working. Some things are working. Here's what we're going to do to correct. So that's kind of the model we share with people when they really want to be intentional about it.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks for that, because it's really interesting to see, because I really like the idea that, you know, it's a strategy like any other strategy, and you have to approach it with intention and the right process involved. The one thing I really found that I mean, the whole thing was interesting, but the one that I picked up on was the comment that you made was that this is new to some people, right? You mentioned on leadership. And of course, you know, just because it's new doesn't mean they don't have to, you know, get on board. But I'm curious, how, I mean, at CIRA, you know, we don't have this problem because we have an amazing leader in this regard who members will get to speak to later, Sunita Alias, our VP of People, Culture, and Brand. But if you're at an organization where you have difficulty getting people on board, do you have any techniques for helping bring those people along?
So we tend to avoid the training perspective because we believe like people learn by doing. So we run series of workshops starting with leadership teams, and in these workshops, if they're not quite diverse yet, we try to bring some of the diversity in the room so they can hear real stories from people who are in the organization. The other huge point that really helps people maybe cross that barrier of not believing that things are different for different experiences or identities is data, right? We're here in the tech sector. Data analytics, huge. Data analytics is important. Maybe sometimes we suffer with too much data, but I don't feel like there's such a thing when we're talking EDI. Being able to showcase to leaders on kind of the flow on this talent life cycle and how different people are experiencing their corporation, to say, look, this is the flow of like a woman from recruitment all the way to the moment she left, or the moment that or how long you kept her stagnated on a specific role. And these are the flow of like the trends for men when they join this corporation. So being able to actually showcase through numbers and really qualify, like these are experience that's not the one-off, because we're very quick to say, okay, that was one case. No, these are the trends within 5 years of analysis of the organization. We have a few organizations we work with that were able to get like Workday data for 5 years and be able to analyze like globally the changes that you see and the results on investments they did throughout EDI. So getting data points, like we do have a sector that's quite a group of analytic people that sits on top. So being able to walk them through the reality of their workplace and the reality of the model behaviors that they have in and what that does for the experience of employees, quite important.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, you mentioned data as an important factor, and you know, of course it is, particularly in tech. I'm thinking, you know, in some of the work that I do around branding and marketing and things like that, I know, you know, one of the factors that comes into play a lot is just the fact that we are often selling or marketing or advertising to a very diverse audience, and to have those perspectives in the room when those decisions are being made is really, really important, not just to metrics, but to like understanding perspectives when you're building creative or campaigns. You mentioned earlier building personas for websites. It's very similar to that. Talk to me a little bit about how that has sort of changed the game in terms of EDI as well.
Yeah, like even going back to the personas, that's one exercise that we've been doing based on the data that we access for organizations, and then create that model of like, this is the flow for someone who have this intersectionality or have these identities in your organization, and being able to almost do the role play, right? We tend to kind of walk away from it because people feel uncomfortable, but being able to put leaders in that position to say, this is what happens, right, to this person. So like walk into that role, and we're trying to like advance technology to be able to give people that experience so they can feel it, and hopefully then help them change mindsets through going through that. But yeah, like using leadership models and challenges within the room where they can really share these experiences. Like it's talking about privilege from a perspective where understand that your role in society and the experiences you had and the results and achievements you had were informed or were influenced by the history and by all the systems that are developed and put in this way that enable you to get here, right? Like people tend to go into the defensive mode and saying, hold on a second, I worked really hard to get here. We all work really hard to get where we get, but the reality is there are systems supporting or benefiting specific groups more than others, right? So being able to find ways to showcase that conversation or enabling them to have that conversation in a way that's not threatening, but really allows them to put themselves in that position of someone else's shoes and then understand why they're not present in that room to this date. Sometimes it's really effective on getting them to open themselves up to have a more deep conversation or sign up for different programs and strategies.
Right, yeah. And you talked about you know, everyone feeling like they've worked hard to get to where they are. And that brings me to the idea of career advancement. So, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, there's an obvious gap in terms of equity and diversity in leadership positions. So I'm curious, when it comes to career advancement, what are some strategies you recommend for increasing diversity in leadership roles?
Sure. One of the first things we do in diagnostic for organizations is to ask for the leadership pipeline group. Most organizations carry kind of that list of the chosen ones, and you can see very clearly where the culture of the organization is when you look at that list, because those are the ones who get access to opportunities like showing up on conference, speaking panels, the new and exciting projects or new business strategies that comes in for the organization, they get the chance. And unfortunately, for most organizations, that leadership pipeline is the least diverse group that we receive as like, okay, this is a group of people we want to see as new leaders. So one challenge we put in front of organizations is exactly that, like how were they selected? Like is there any transparency here on the ways you're selecting people, or is it like culture-led, meaning they fit in, right? That's why they get to be here. So really understanding and creating systems that are transparent, because like when we talk to groups of women, for example, most times it's not clear what's the path to leadership, right? That transparency on the processes for organizations, it's almost like non-existent. So if it's not transparent, then how is the subject matter like really being chosen to say like this is the next group of leaders in our organization. So we do need to create systems where people know like this is the amount of hours I need to put, or these are the degrees I need to have, this is the amount of sales I need to provide, this is the number of projects I need to participate. Like it needs to be clear, and that mentorship or sponsorship, even like sponsorship sometimes being a lot more important than mentorship, and sponsorship being talking about the people you want to see grow, right? Recognizing their projects, recognize their contribution, so the opportunities becomes more level to different groups in the organization. So when you think about career advancement in organizations and strategies, really assessing the model that you're using today. So how people got from A to B, and B being kind of that top leadership role, and really defining the processes and defining what's required to get there so everybody has access to it.
I've never heard that word used in that context before, sponsorship. I really like that. It's so, I mean, obviously everyone's heard of mentorship, but sponsorship is basically just talking about people as opposed to helping them, which, I mean, obviously you should do both, but I feel like that's a really, I mean, obviously I've done it before, but I've never heard the term used that way. I really like that word. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, no, there was a program in Canada, I believe, Go Sponsor Her, and they tried to essentially get senior leaders, men and women, to select people that they really wanted to see growing, and talk about them in social media, and really profile people to say like these are the leaders of tomorrow. I don't think it took off completely, but it's something I would love to see really working for organizations as a whole, where it's like, okay, if we're going to keep this leadership pipeline group, let's make it clear who they are, right? Instead of the very it's not clear nowadays, right? Like we know they exist, we know people talk about them on the backstage, but it's never clear like these are the people that we're shaping to be the future leaders, and it should be more clear and transparent.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, because I think coaching, you know, one-on-one coaching is often something that people do and they feel like they're helping, but it's not enough to just coach. You also have to promote. So that's a really good point. I just want to go back. It's interesting, this kind of looping back around to the start of our conversation when we talked about belonging. It feels like this is sort of this negative feedback loop where if someone doesn't feel that they belong, or if they don't feel safe, then they're not going to speak up in meetings or in, you know, bring their ideas forward, and therefore they're not going to be considered leadership material. Like it feels like this is the feedback loop that some organizations often get caught in, where the leadership pipeline is very non-diverse, but it's because the whole process that's been put in place from the beginning, even if it's not like that on paper, is not setting them up properly for success.
Yeah, we need to be open to challenge the models of leadership we have today, right? There's very specific traits that we sometimes call the A type, or there are other titles we put towards it that it's like defines like the very outspoken person. And like there's a list of things that we consider like this is leadership material, and other types of leadership out there, right? Like I've worked in mining most of my life, and in mining, I've heard many times of saying like, oh, but you can do it, you're tough. But it's like, but does everybody have to be tough to play these roles? Or it's like, are you looking for the specialization and the resume that I can do it? Or really like what makes me make it as a woman in this workplace, because I'm essentially having to operate as a man, right? So those are the challenges we need to put into like, what is the fit in? What is the leadership model that we're recognizing and celebrating? Because we can guarantee that there are other leadership models that can be quite successful as well, but we need to change the whole structure, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like if you put someone in leadership, and then your clients and everybody that you relate to as an organization will require that same leadership model. So it's like we need to have a conversation that's a lot more broad about what works for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, the idea of what makes a good leader is very much sort of baked into, I don't know, our society, pop culture, whatever you want to call it. I think at a societal level, we still haven't gotten there yet. How would you start breaking down those leadership models internally in an organization? Like what would be the strategies there?
So celebrating different leadership models, right? Like, and I think what I already mentioned around performance evaluation, if the leadership model that you're celebrating is just the core, like we have a chart that shows like a pyramid and like being the core business at the top. So if your core business is software development or sales, and that's the only thing you recognize and celebrate in your organization, you might lose like the whole foundation of your organization and everybody who supports the team to be able to execute those sales, right? So you have the development team, you have HR, you have finance, and if you only celebrating brokers or salespeople, like there needs to be a better balance to how we look at organizations and how we reward people. So when we look at new leadership models, it's like starting celebrating the people leader, right? When you say you care about culture and you care about respect at work, if someone did something great, like recognize that, right? We need to stop celebrating only like the value-based transactions. We need to go into value from a more like behavior and culture perspective. I think the moment we start doing that, then we're going to start celebrating other models of leadership. Like a good example that I think through our COVID time was a leader from New Zealand, right? I think it was very visible that a different model of leadership could really work. And then we had a chance to compare models of leadership with other countries and other places that we saw throughout the pandemic. So I think if we start seeing that in business as well and recognizing and celebrating leaders who are doing something different, I think we might start shaping the business world, not just the tech world, in a different way. Okay.
Well, I mean, I've had a really great time chatting with you, but we've got to bring in some audience questions here, or else I'll just sit here and talk your ear off for another half an hour. We're going to open things up to the audience now. A reminder that you can submit questions in the window to the right of the video player, and you can upvote questions you want to see asked. And so now I'm going to jump into the questions that we have. There's quite a few here already, which is great. Evelyn asks, how do you help newcomers build trust? And I'm not sure if she means newcomers to the organization or newcomers to Canada, but I think it's probably similar answer, but maybe I'm wrong.
Newcomers to the organization, let's start there. Unfortunately, I failed to see great onboarding processes. So we do need to get so much better at integrating people in the organization. We all do, as organizations, always a quite amazing job as like charming people to say, this is the great workplace you're going to come in, and these are all the things that we offer. Like we do our best to like show that shining object at the beginning, but then once people walk in, people are not there to support, and then it can feel quite lonely, and then you're like, okay, I don't know my way around. And then we bump into the whole question around transparency of systems. Like, what do I need to do to continue to grow here or to be part of this team? So there is a lot of work to be done around onboarding and integration, and like having a specific buddy system where you do get assigned someone who's going to support you. Very clear guidelines on who are the people who are going to support your first month, your first 3 months, your first year, and have checkpoints where people are not only walking you through your work and the systems that you need to operate, but also here are things you need to know about our culture. Here's when we hang out as a team. These are the things that we do that forms the way we see this workplace. So really bringing people in, like I always say that workplaces unfortunately tend to like be similar, or when we used to go to the office, to be similar to the high school movies we see coming from the US, where the eating area, you can always see the ones that are not welcomed. Unfortunately, I've walked into workplaces in Canada, in Toronto downtown, where it was exactly like that at lunchtime. You can see the groupings and you can see who gets in with like in-group, out-group situations. So I think corporations need to do a better job as talking about what's important, not only talking about it, but showing the behaviors and grouping people and showing that mentorship program, sponsorship program, and people being responsible from the moment the person walked in or the moment that they put an offer in front of people, all the way to ensure that they're going to succeed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm proud to say at CIRA, we have a lot of those processes in place already. We have a really great buddy system and onboarding program that I think bodes really well for organizations. So good to hear you echoing a lot of the stuff we're doing. Next question, and I think this is Erica. I believe this is former CIRA employee Erica. So hi, Erica. What's an example of how you've seen a workplace change a process or system to create a safer culture?
I will go to America, but we did forget to talk about newcomers to Canada.
So my bad.
Just quick on that. There are tons of groups now, at least like in Toronto, I know there is, and I can probably send you a few to CIRA after, so you can share with people who participate in this webcast. But essentially, like, find groups that can really support you. Like their courses, I remember I used to have a friend who just arrived from Mexico, and she was able to sign up to something that was like multicultural understanding, where they would actually walk people through the understanding of Canadian workplaces. And like, there is a transition to be done from whatever you're coming from to what happens in here, right? So understanding specific behaviors, what's expected from a culture, like how to behave in meetings and different things. Like, I'm Brazilian Canadian, and we definitely, you can see, I talk to my hands, very different. So like understanding those little things and being able to accept that people will be different, but also know like how to transition and not to feel not included, but also like how to like speak up when you need to. So there are groups that can help on that. And I think organizations are becoming better as well of doing exactly what you said, the onboarding system and integration, where they can explain the culture of that workplace so people can really walk in and feel a little bit more embraced and welcomed.
Absolutely.
And then to Erica's question, example, have you seen workplace change? So again, I think you heard me saying this, I work mostly with mining companies nowadays, and some technology companies as well, but focus in mining. Safer culture is something that's talked about all the time. My experience on tech companies, the way we created a way for people to understand that the policies are not there just to be policies on the wall or on your onboarding process, but policies that actually are implemented and effective, was to get everybody to speak about it. So from safety pings, where we got the leadership to use for a while to say, speak up. If you speak up, we're going to essentially take care of you, to further explain what the policy means on a practical way. So if something happens to you, here are the steps that you take. Here in this office, the first person you talk to, if you're uncomfortable talking to this person, here's option B, right? So all those systems that sometimes we have designed in a policy, what is the practical terms to how you actually, what people need to do if something happens to them, or if they see something happening to someone, right? The whole TTC thing, if you see something, say something, it's all great, but unless you explain very clear to people what are the steps, so they feel comfortable enough to take these steps, and then you showcase what are the consequences applied, meaning you took the steps, you brought something to the table, coming back to the person and saying, look, after you showcase us that experience was happening, here are the steps that we took to correct it. These are the changes in policy. This is what happened next. Having that systems of consequences is quite important for people to build that trust and for the culture to be really safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next question. Shangiz, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, asks, inclusion is about mindset. How do you, oh, screen just changed.
It's at the top.
Oh, there we go. Inclusion is about mindset. How do you assure the mindset of your people about inclusion?
That's a great question. So mindsets and change, that's always a topic that we could spend like hours here just talking about that, on how to change behavior. Like, I had this amazing discussion with my business partner on what changes first, if it's behavior or mindset, and the leads, right? And to change behavior, really believe that we need to put the tools in place, right? It needs to matter when things happen. You need to know what to do. And then the big question for organizations is, if they did it right once, or if they took the right steps on the first time, how do we ensure that there's going to be a consistency on how people do those steps, right? So if there's a big campaign around speak up and safety culture, and for that year of the campaign, people are doing the right thing, it's like, how do you confirm that that's going to continue to happen over time? So the mindset around inclusion, first you need to get people up to their understanding of what inclusion means and the difference that we have in how to treat people, right? And understanding the privilege that might be as part of a culture for a few groups and not for others. And once you get that understanding up, giving people the right actions and tools for them to behave better, essentially, it's what we need to put in place. So even from like tools on saying, if this happens, here's the next thing to do. So like simplifying for people, right? Like we have this conversation a lot of where it starts, and at the top it might start with strategies and definition of behaviors, but then every single layer of the organization needs to know, what does it mean for me, right? So if I'm doing a recruiting process and I'm the hiring manager for the situation, how do I do a structured interview? How do I ensure that I'm not applying all my biases towards every single step of this way? So having the process lined up, people really understanding this process and checkpoints, so you validate that things are conform they're supposed to be, it's quite important. So how do you assure the mindset? You put the systems in place to ensure that people are moving towards new mindsets.
Okay, next question I have here is another one from Erica. What kinds of data do you use to show the impact of DEI work? How do you incorporate that with qualitative insights?
I love data, so this is awesome. That's coming up. And Erica is like our top questioner here. So kinds of data, we do have, I think as we start here, we're able nowadays to use data analytics to essentially check the experience throughout the employee life cycle. So if you take a specific group and you see like, this is how much time people are spending, or these are how many people are coming into the organization, this is how much time they're being retained in these specific roles, or this is when they drop out, right? At this level, it's when they drop out, or at this business unit, we have the biggest problem with people leaving. Those type of data really help you to correct or apply changes to where it really needs to be changes. Like the conversation with organization around best practice is like, I can put in front of you 100 best practice, but the question will be, what are the practices that are already going to fix the issues that you have in your workplace, right? So when we look at the impact of D&I work, the first question should be, what are the challenges for your specific organization? And once you identify and diagnose those challenges, then what are the solutions that can help you close those specific gaps? And then for each one of those solutions, you can 100% put metrics that will define the positioning of those programs and the return on that specific investment, right? Or the results that you want to see on those. And as a big picture, then it goes back to that shaping or intentionally shaping the culture. If the vision was a more diverse organization, then you have ways to measure that. If the definition was a more inclusive culture where opportunities are given to all the groups that belong into that organization, you can measure that, right? So the challenge we have today is that people go to the quick one, which is let's measure diversity, but tons of ways of measuring your complaint line, right? Your helpline, how are we addressing it? What type of complaints are coming? Respective workplace, like how are people being treated? Like you can put measures, and there's like tons of support out there for you to understand inclusive or inclusion metrics versus diversity metrics that you can do for sure a quick search, and you're going to find tons of those.
Yeah, I would imagine things like employee surveys would be good for inclusion, because that would be the kind of thing that most people would want to be anonymous or not necessarily, wouldn't necessarily flag if not given an opportunity to do so in a discreet way. Is that fair to say?
We do use the culture surveys as a ways of measuring experience for sure, and guiding us to try and diagnose and find more details on the experience people are having. I think the mix of HR data analytics and the culture survey. So if we run the culture survey first, you're probably going to see the alignment of demographic and experience and say, okay, this group is having a challenge, and this group is, it's like their experience of the workplace is different. And the great thing about then using HR analytics to inform decisions is to say, okay, they said this is the experience. Let's then look into what really happened, which areas happened, how are we treating them? Like, what are our policies and systems doing for them? And then be able to correct the challenge at the source, right?
Right. So next question is from Mariana, who asks, I understand changing culture is a process, but what can be done for people today? What kind of change can be done in a short period? I mean, that's a really interesting question, because I think, culture doesn't shift overnight. So what can you do in the short term if you have, you're trying to implement short-term change in advance of long-term strategic change?
Yeah, we all want magic pills, and the truth is there's no magic pills here. It is a process. It's like, some people don't like the word, but it is a long journey, right? So when we talk about tech participation of different groups, like we all as tech industry, we should come together and say, okay, let's put our efforts towards the colleges and the universities and different groups who are not participating today to bring them into our industry, right? So there's definitely the need for long-term strategy and long-term vision towards what we're trying to achieve, because yes, there's no quick fix. But then when we look into people's behavior, I think one of the things that everybody who's watching us here today can do is look at yourself, right? Like analyze your own behavior and how you're looking into things so you can help yourself and on the path help others to figure those things out. So one exercise I always tell people to do, it's like a quick elevator check, now that we're out and riding elevators again. If you walked in and you saw someone in the elevator, there's always like a rush of ideas that comes to your mind, right? You place people in these boxes so quickly, right? Our brain is super capable of doing that. Check those boxes, like how you identify this person, what did you think of them? And then challenge yourself, like, why are those my beliefs? Like, and if those are my beliefs and there are people with those same characteristics and identities at my job, how do I behave towards them? Right? So if we start doing that self-assessment, we're probably going to be able to start identify that behavior in our supervisor or on the manager we work with. And if we have a culture, hopefully that culture is there for speaking up, you can probably have that conversation with someone. Look, I noticed that you've treated Spencer a bit different that you treated Jamile yesterday. Like, can you have a conversation about the opportunities that they're having and how this person has been assigned to this project and not this person? So I think once we start really paying attention at these behaviors and the ways we're acting in the organization, we all can help each other on improving that culture.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So next question from Shangiz again. Do you have belonging as part of your EDI policy? So I guess that's a question, I mean, just in general, is how does belonging fit into EDI policy?
Yeah, we have like a flow of different letters being used throughout EDI. So the name of my company, for example, it's INV 101, because I came from, I guess, the school of Accenture, and we used to call it inclusion and diversity, because we definitely believe that inclusion came first. And then if you fix the culture, you're going to be able to include a more diverse population, and they will be able to experience the organization and have better and improved opportunities. So coming from that, and definitely like we added equity because now we understand that not everybody starts from the same place. And that was a very clear recognition that needed to be addressed. And it's part of the conversation on meritocracy and everything that really brings out of people when you start having the EDI conversation. Belonging, I saw a few organizations that they did, right? Diversity, inclusion, and belonging. The way I explain belonging is that if you're working really hard on the culture and creating a culture of inclusion where everybody's actually able to participate and have opportunities, belonging will be a consequence, right? So interesting to add the letter, 100%. I don't know if the question was focused on put the B or not put the B, but belonging, we do feel that for most organizations we work with, belonging is always going to be part of the conversation, but throughout the solving for the inclusion portion. So if you really believe inclusion matters and you're solving for inclusion, belonging might come.
Okay, so you're saying that belonging is almost like a result of inclusion, like it's a state of being after you've created an inclusive culture. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, that
okay.
It's hard to challenge a feeling, right? Belonging is a feeling. So if you do create that environment where people can feel that way, you're going to see belonging coming through. Okay,
good to know. Next question says, tech loves to solve problems with tech. What's out there? I think that this is Omar. I think Omar means what tech platforms or technology solutions might there be out there for DEI?
No, that's great. And Omar actually reached out via LinkedIn as well when he saw the session. So he described the question with a lot more words before, so I know what he means. But yeah, so technology advances for EDI. We do have a few, actually. There's ways to go towards having more technology that can support the work we're discussing here, but there are softwares or technology solutions for bias-free or bias-reduced recruitment, right? So blinding the process to ensure that candidates at least make to the short list, ensuring that the language on job descriptions are gender neutral, for example, or that are not essentially eliminating a group by the way it's described. One of the things I love to challenge corporations that it's not so tech related, but something that you all can do is that we tend to reuse job descriptions a lot. And job descriptions might not even be what you're looking for anymore for that role, but because we love the copy and paste, we paste things that like don't need to be there. So like stop doing job descriptions that are 3 pages long and just makes people feel like they would never be able to execute that job, because chances are, like, if you were the hiring manager, check your own job. Like, do you actually check the whole 3 pages list that you just created? Because if you don't, why you're trying to hire someone with all of that? But anyways, sidebar. But you see a lot.
Fair enough.
Bias-free assessment. So there are tools and platforms for focus on reducing and excluding kind of the noise that skew assessments towards one way or another. There is more measuring, benchmarking, right? So all the solutions around employee surveys and the inclusion of inclusion questions and the benchmarking with other groups that will help you into the data analytics and all the thoughts around retention. Data analytics, right? We're advancing every day and really understanding how to do the assessment. AI enhancement tools to actually help all this process, with the caveat that we're still learning on how to fix AI, right? AI tends to essentially repeat a lot of the challenge and a lot of the bias that the people who are designing have. So if we don't have a very diverse group designing it, chances are it will carry the same issues. So there's advance to come, but we are seeing more and more tools coming from the market, and some of them really helping the change.
Wow, yeah. DEI in AI would be a whole other hour-long conversation all on its own, because that's an interesting and controversial topic. I think we're going to have to make this our last question so we can wrap up. And it comes from David. And he says, often the leadership understanding and the management implementation of EDI is a point of contention and creating barriers for individuals. What is the recommended process to ensure goodwill and best intentions are realized?
A great question, David. If you have an answer, I'd love to hear your answer. So even though the exercise of choosing corporations to work with on creating like better inclusive cultures, we struggle sometimes because there are corporations that are doing it from the marketing perspective, and we are always trying to filter them to ensure that we're working with corporations that are quite serious about doing the right thing or creating workspaces where everybody is welcome and will have the opportunities to grow. So recommended process to ensure goodwill. I think we need to help people get through the understanding, right? So if we think about management being the barrier or the point of contention here, as you described, we need to like figure out how to bring them through that journey. The best way we do that, it's always meet people where they are on their maturity curve. So if someone has been inactive for many years or their leadership model really doesn't account for the participation of different identities at the workplace, trying to understand that person, why the beliefs are there, why the mindset is such, and walking them through the reality of this world or experience of people in that specific workplace so you can start opening their minds. It's where we start. So having the courageous and sometimes very difficult conversations, you might not see the change right away, but with time you might be able to start opening up people's minds.
Okay. Well, Jamile, thanks so much for this discussion. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience before we go?
I love the participation. I love the questions. I can see we have so many more questions here. So I appreciate everybody who joined us this afternoon. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to this team. I loved participating, and I hope to have more contacts and more conversations with all of you. So feel free to reach out. And yes, let's make the changes. You need to believe in the transformation, but you also need to really actively engage in the transformation you want to see. So I believe everybody has a responsibility. So take your part in it and really do the work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jamile. Really appreciate you being with us today.